Book 4, Falcon in the Barn, Chapter 5. What did I almost do? It was desperation that was driving Mari now. Desperation that her husband was nearly gone. But she wasn't about to give up. She stood on her bed in the middle of the night, grasping his wrist and holding it above her head in the dark. In that hand was his long knife, trembling to find a target. "Who are you?" he shouted at her. "Your wife," she yelled back. "No, you're not. You killed her." "Perrin, just open your eyes. Look at me. Look at your wrist." "It's a trick," he shouted, panicked. Mari noticed a movement at her bedroom door, but didn't take her focus off her husband. It was too much to hope that it was Shem. He'd been suffering from a cold and decided his coughing all night would disturb Perrin, so he stayed at the fort. Well, it didn't disturb Perrin, she realized, as she tensed her measly muscles to keep her husband's strong arm in the air and his long knife away from her neck. He was disturbed all on his own. "Perrin Shin," she said as calmly as she could, "I order you to put down this knife and command you to look at your wrist." "There's nothing there," he wailed. "That's right. Nothing's there, so you're in a dream." "Mother," came a whimper at the door. It was Pato, and he was lighting a candle. "Will this help?" Without glancing his way, she nodded. "Perrin, look for the candle. Open your eyes and come out of this now, soldier." In the growing light, Mari could tell his eyes were still closed, but they cracked open a bit, squinting at the flame. Mari firmed her grip on his arm, making sure the knitted chain was visible between her clenched fingers. "Eyes open wider, Colonel. Good. Now look at your wrist. What do you see there?" Perrin, blinking in confusion, scowled as he looked at his arm. "The chain?" he whispered. "Good," Mari said, impressed with her ability to remain so composed. "Now look a little higher and see what's in your hand." His gaze crept up to his hand, and when he saw what he was about to do, he gasped, dropping the long knife. Mari ducked out of the way, but the blade tip jabbed into her shoulder before it tumbled onto the bed. "Mother!" Pato cried, but he didn't dare come into the room. I'm fine, she said, crawling off the bed, while her husband collapsed onto it. "Just a minor nick, I'm sure, no real pain." She slipped her bed dress off her shoulder to inspect the now bleeding cut. "Doesn't even need resin. Pato, go get me a clean rag, please. And leave the candle, and don't wake your sister." Pato obediently handed her the candle and darted down the stairs. Mari set the candle on the dresser, retrieved the long knife from the side of the bed, and slipped it into her stocking drawer, where she knew her husband wouldn't find it. He remained curled up on the bed, shaking. She was surprised she'd reached this point. The terror was gone, replaced by numbed acceptance. She wasn't even trembling as much as she expected for having been nearly murdered. Sitting down by her husband, she put a hand experimentally on his shuddering shoulder. "Perrin?" She didn't expect him to suddenly sit up and grab her, clumsily pulling her body next to his, clawing at her almost with an animal-like intensity as he tried to envelop her. "Sorry, so sorry. What did I nearly do?" It was difficult to embrace him back, because he was squeezing her too firmly for her to wriggle her arms free. Instead, she stroked his arm with one of her free fingers. "It's all right. It's over now. Did you notice that looking at your wrist worked? I think it helped wake you up." But he didn't hear her over his mumbling of, "What did I almost do? What did I almost do?" Pato stood at the door again, a damp cloth in his hands and an anxious expression on his face. "It's all right, Pato," Mari told him from somewhere in her husband's body. "Come on in." "What did I almost do?" Perrin continued. "What is this? Blood? Mari!" He released her to see the red spot expanding on her bed dress. Pato gingerly handed his mother the cloth, then stepped back to the relative safety of the doorway. Mari patted Perrin's hand and sat up out of his grip. Putting the cloth on her shoulder, she said, just a nick. He stared at her shoulder in growing horror. Hide it, my long knife, where I can't find it. Already have, she said as brightly as possible. Let me help you, he said as he made to take the damp cloth off her shoulder. Not too sure of how gentle he was at the moment, she said, Really, Perrin, it's fine. Please let me do this, he said with such yearning that Mari let her hand drop and allowed him to remove the damp cloth. He grimaced when he saw the perfect puncture point. Tenderly, he wiped off the remaining blood with the damp cloth, while Mari tensed in worry. No, it's not too bad, he agreed, but it's still horrible. It's fine, she assured him again. To her surprise, he bent down and kissed her wound as if she were 3 years old. Pato, in the doorway, turned away. Mari noticed. Thank you, son. Go back to bed now. He nodded before trotting down the stairs. Perrin gingerly put the damp cloth on her shoulder again. Bleeding's already slowing. They sat in silence for a few minutes, Mari too exhausted to think of anything else but a prayer of gratitude that nothing worse transpired. What Perrin thought as he repeatedly pressed the cloth on her shoulder, she could only imagine. Eventually he said, It's never got this far before, has it? Besides you and Shem blooding each other's noses, no, she said softly, and it was just an accident. What if you hadn't been stopping me, though? She shrugged and regretted it as her shoulder twinged. Again, her husband kissed it, as if somehow that would make the wound vanish. Nothing did happen, Perrin. I can't go on like this anymore, he said so softly she almost didn't hear him. Sickened by what he may have meant by that, she hugged him fiercely. Well, I can, she told him, for as long as you need to. He hugged her back, but something felt different about him, some terrible notion of giving up. That morning, Pato left for school earlier than normal so he could run first to the rectory and pound on the door. Rector Young flung it open. Pato? Come in, come in. Last night, he said, gulping in the warm air of Young's small fire. It's bad. Shem's been sick, so he wasn't there, but this time there was bloodshed. Young's eyebrows flew upwards. Whose? Are you all right? Pato nodded. Yes, everyone's fine. Not that bad, but it was my mother. Father was holding his long knife above her, sure that she had killed herself or something. I brought up a candle, and he saw me in the light and dropped the knife on Mother, he said in a rush. Just a nick, but... He paused to collect himself. It worried me. Rector Young pulled him into a gentle hug. Of course. And your sister? She doesn't know. Slept through it. Father was really upset. But the bracelet thing, it helped wake him up or something. Young nodded. Good, but now this is going too far. We need to confront this bear. I don't know how that will help, Pato said in resignation. On Holy Day, I'll talk to him, Rector Young promised. Perrin didn't go to the fort that morning. By the time dawn had arrived, he was still so out of sorts that he'd put his uniform on before shaving. Halfway through his breakfast, he remembered and went to the washroom. It was while he was slicing off the stubble from his throat with the single-edged blade that he caught his reflection in the mirror. Or rather, he caught the reflection of the army patch, the one with the sword imposed on top of the pine tree. The sword tip seemed to be aimed right at his head, and the army will kill you. Abruptly, he dropped his razor into the washing basin and darted out of the washing room. He didn't know where those words came from, his imagination or somewhere else, but they terrified him nonetheless. Panting, he jerked open the back door and ran onto the back porch, breathing in the cool morning air. Unable to control the trembling of his hands, he shoved them into his pockets. 2 soldiers coming off patrols for the night passed along the back alley, and Perrin whistled to them. Tell Thorne I'll be in for the afternoon shift. Got some things to do around here. The soldiers nodded to him uncertainly, then saluted, forcing Perrin to remove his jittery right hand from his pocket to salute back, and they jogged off to the fort. Perrin sighed, and feeling something itchy on his throat, rubbed it. His hand came away with a mixture of gray soap and red blood. He'd cut himself, likely when he dropped his razor. No wonder his soldiers regarded him with such trepidation. Back in the washing room, he smiled dismally at himself in the mirror. He was a bit of a mess, he thought, as he reluctantly picked up the razor again. But he couldn't finish the shaving job. He couldn't bear to hold another blade again. Not just yet. Instead, he took a rag and wiped his face, partly shaved, partly stubble, and dabbed at the nick, right next to that blood vessel, the one they teach the soldiers about. Want to hit your enemy right there, to make him bleed to death. Want to make sure you never get hit there, or if he'd only been just a finger width closer, then... He shuffled into the gathering room and plopped on the sofa. Mari tilted her head at him as she readied her bag for school. "Going to work later today?" she asked, far too cheerily. He only nodded. "Want me to stay with you until then?" He heard the hint of hesitancy in her tone. While half of him wanted to say yes, the other half didn't want to be reminded of what he nearly did to her. "No, go ahead. I'm just going to rest." She kissed him on the forehead. "All right, then." She produced a smile so exceptionally merry that Perrin would have been surprised in the least bit if, once she reached the back garden, songbirds flocked to her and butterflies accompanied her to school. Alone in the house, he headed to his study and slumped into the chair. In his dream, he was only moments away from plunging his knife into the neck of a garter, into the neck of her. Last week he had slept better, and it was after he wrote a few responses to letters. With growing anxiety, he snatched the rest of the letters waiting on the shelf and started answering them. Hogel used to say the best way to get over feeling sorry for yourself was to forget yourself and do something for someone else. It was a feeble effort, but he needed to begin to absolve himself of nearly committing an unforgivable crime, although it was like draining the river with a mug. Half an hour later, he realized, as he started into the fourth letter, that it was providing him a sense of completion, of tying up loose ends, of finishing a nagging task, of ending. 2 days later, on Holy Day, Mari hugged her mother outside the rectory. "I can stay to help," Heisemum offered again, but the tone of her voice suggested she'd rather go start dinner for them all instead. Mari shook her head. "It's all right. I'm not sure what you could do anyway." Heisemum sighed sadly. "Is your shoulder feeling better?" "Scabbed over nicely, yes. Just go home, Mother. We'll be by later to eat." Heisemum squeezed her daughter's arm and looked over at Shem, who stood nearby. "I'll bring them over myself early, in case he gets worse," Shem promised. "I'll make fresh rolls," she promised him back. With a kiss on her daughter's cheek and a wave to her grandchildren, Heisemum picked her way through the snow after the congregation meeting. "Why do they call it raining season?" Mari grumbled as she kicked a clump of slush with her boot. "It's always snowing here." Shem, standing next to her in the frigid air, tried to chuckle, but it turned into a fit of hacking. Mari patted his back uselessly until he stopped coughing. "This raining season is brought to you by the same minds in Idemia that declared the sky to be blue." Shem looked up into the gray, washed expanse of it. Mari scoffed. "I don't even know why I bother checking its color anymore." They stood outside the congregation hall near a tree, waiting for Perrin. Jatsi and Peto were a little ways away, making snowballs, and half-heartedly taking aim at a nearby trunk. "Shem," Mari whispered, "look at Jatsi and Peto, alone. There are no more teenagers here on Holy Day. They're either at the dances or entertainments or the games. They've got no one." "So what do you want them to do?" Shem said softly back. "Let them go after midday meal? Send them off dancing or to the amphitheater?" Mari twisted to look at him. "Of course not. Why would I allow it today when I don't allow it during the week? Besides, a holy day is all day, not just until the service is over. Calmly he said, then what other option is there? Mari, sometimes doing the right thing means a life of solitude. That's when she noticed the depth of gloom in his eyes. Since he was 20, she'd been taken in by his big, happy blue eyes. But she didn't realize until then how his eyes had changed. They were duller, sadder. There was still a faint twinkle when he looked at her, but his eyes were colder and definitely older and lonely. "Oh, Shem," she whispered, touching his arm. "Here I am complaining, and there you are still single. I'm just not thinking." He smiled at her, a tiny bit of twinkle trying to rise up in the expanse of heavy blue. "Nothing to apologize for, Mari. I'm just stating a fact. But you're right. Look around. Which of these women could I marry? The only single ones left are widows with children my age." Mari chuckled sadly. "Message received. And I'll stop nagging you about finding a wife. And I also won't bring up that Serene was asking after you again. I finally broke down and visited her little bookshop, thinking I might find something diverting in there." "And?" "Oh, I was diverted all right. Don't you ever go in there. Not that I'm one to advocate more laws, but the books she's selling, there ought to be several laws against those." Shem smiled grimly. "I assumed as much. She's not what I'd consider marriageable either." "Agreed. And I'm sorry that being devoted to us for so many years has meant that you have only us." "It's all right, Mari. Truly," he said. "I've made peace with the idea that I may never be married. It's better than being with someone who may persuade me away from my belief in the Creator, and it's far better than behaving in a less than honorable manner. The next 50, 60 years will seem temporary compared to the 1,000 years reward to live with the Creator. Each year slips by so quickly, so it really doesn't matter." He never ceased to amaze her. "I wished I had your insight, Shem. You should have been a rector, you know that?" Again his sad smile appeared. "Not the first time I've heard that, but this is my calling. I'm sure of it." He followed that up with a pathetic chuckle which dissolved into coughing. It used to be that he and Perrin would laugh every time they got together. Mari noticed years ago that their laughs had both changed to mimic each other. They had the same pitch, rhythm, and length, as if the two men were truly brothers. She couldn't remember the last time she heard either of them laugh. Shem and Mari watched the front door. Rector Young was saying goodbye to his attendees, which didn't take long since there were less than 50 who still went on Holy Day. Holiday to the rest of the world. The Briders came out of the hall, waved at Mari and Shem, then headed for Jatesy. She rushed over to give Mrs. Brider a hug. "See, Mari, Jatesy's got a friend," Shem elbowed her. "So what if she's nearly the same age as her mother? That's a woman you can trust, right?" Mari chuckled miserably. "Yes, Jatesy could do far worse. Mrs. Brider is a very lovely but odd woman. Anyone who willingly plunges their hands into dirt is odd." Shem grinned. "Well, I like them. They're improving the diet of the soldiers, and we never had such a consistent supply of butter until the Briders came with their cows." Mari smiled in agreement, but wasn't about to let it go, especially since she saw a bit of brightness return to his eyes. "I've got opinions about men who willingly touch those things to get milk. That's not just odd, it's downright indecent." It worked. Shem laughed out loud, and Mari sighed in pleasure, until Shem's laugh transferred into another fit of coughing. The Briders, not knowing the source of the amusement, waved again to say farewell to Mari and Shem, who recovered quickly. "There they are, waving those hands," Mari murmured under her breath as she waved back. "I'll never shake those hands, mark my words." Shem laughed again in his hacking, precisely as Mari hoped he would. She'd apologize to the Briders someday for using them for a light moment, as she uselessly patted Shem's back again. A shadow at the rectory doors drew Mari and Shem's attention, for behind a shriveled old woman shaking Rector Young's hand stood Perrin, his arms folded, and looking like an irritated bear with an appetite. Young had asked Perrin to stay for a few minutes after everyone had left, and Shem and Mari knew why. After the old woman, Rector Young glanced over to Shem and Mari and subtly winked. They nodded back once. Perrin now took his place at the door, looking quite put out. "What do you need, Rector Young?" The rector patted him genially, which Mari thought was exceptionally brave. "Just wanted to talk, Colonel. It's been quite a while, and I miss our conversations. Just for 10 minutes. Perrin gripped his uniform's cap in his hands none too gently. "I really don't have time for a chat." "5 minutes then, Colonel." "Rector." "Colonel, you're getting worse." Young cut straight to the point. "I see it in your eyes, and it's the weather. The darker days, less sunlight, all of it makes your condition deteriorate. I know a little bit about this, but if you can just hold on until planting." Perrin's menacing eyebrow arched. "I have no condition, Rector." And he stepped in front of the old small man. Mari held her breath and gripped Shem's arm in warning when she saw what Rector Young did next. He jumped in front of Perrin and put his wrinkled finger on Perrin's chest. Amazingly, he stopped the colonel, even though he barely came up to Perrin's third brass button. "You do, Perrin Shin, and it will destroy you if you don't fight it. The refuser has focused all his attention on you. He knows that if he destroys you, he destroys a great many other plans as well." "Rector, enough." "Face the nightmares, Colonel, and order them gone. You haven't asked for help yet. Not from me. Rector, you have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, I do, and that's what worries you. You haven't even asked the Creator for his help." "Shut up, Young." "Where's your faith, Colonel? Find it. Use it. We need you, healthy and solid. Order the darkness gone, and then hold on until the snows melt and the sun returns. That's when you'll return." "Look, old man." "Perrin, your darkest days are ahead of you. You cannot give up. Not now. Promise me." Mari, transfixed for the past minute at the sheer bravery of the rector, feared her husband's very thin patience was about to snap. She pulled on Shem's arm to get him to do something, but Shem just shook his head. "Young's got this. Watch." "Rector Young," said Perrin, irritated, "you have no idea what you're talking about." "I know far more than you ever will, Perrin Shin," Young declared. "Now fight! Focus on that woolen chain on your wrist." He grasped Perrin's arm, forcing the chain to slip. "Remember what's real, and your 5 minutes are up. Remove your hand." "Fight, Perrin!" Perrin's movement was so swift that Mari didn't even see his hand flash upwards to grab the rector's arm. He took a step closer and hovered over Rector Young, gripping him tightly. "I fight every minute of every day and night, Young. If you don't believe me, come by some night and see for yourself." He jerked the rector out of the way with such force that Mari gasped. She sent a look of apology at the rector as he stumbled in the snow to regain his footing. He just looked back at Mari with his usual sweet smile. "Until next week, Shin family, Shemzinas," he called over to them, as if he hadn't just nearly had his arm pulled off. Perrin was already striding past Mari and Shem, barking orders to his children that it was time to go home. Jatsi yelped and fell in line, while Pato sent a worried look to the Rector Young. Mari glanced back as well and mouthed, "I'm so sorry." Shem seemed to be doing the same thing. The rector nodded and waved goodbye. "He's fine," Shem whispered to Mari as they followed the Fury in uniform. "Young looks small and fragile, but he's a tough old horse. I've seen him deal with worse." Mari sighed. "At least he said something to him. Oh, Shem, are you sure he wasn't injured or insulted or anything?" Shem shook his head. "No one's ever successfully insulted him because he refuses to be insulted. People do their best, but Young won't even acknowledge the attempt of an affront." Before Mari could comprehend how one did that, Shem continued with, Besides, he's tamed many people over the years. His wife, to begin with. When they first married, apparently she was quite the hothead. He taught her to channel that ferocity. By the time she was middle-aged, she was adept at turning it off and turning it on when needed. I can't imagine him married to someone like that, Mari said. I guess I've always pictured a rector's wife to be like Tabit Densel. Tender, concerned, loving. Oh, Mrs. Young was all of those things, Mari. Not everyone who worries about someone's future will tell them so in a loving manner. They may humble and even intimidate the one they care about. Mrs. Young was quite skilled at that, a perfect match for her ever-gentle husband. She knew precisely what to say to get someone where they needed to be. Forceful love, I guess. I just can't picture a woman like that. Shem looked at her askance. You really can't? Never in your life met a woman like that? Ever? Mari shook her head. Interesting, was all he said. Two men sat in a dark office of an unlit building. I must admit, Genève is proving to be meaner and sharper than Gadaman, Mal said. Then again, Cotton's sharper than Gadaman. Still, Genève's holding that department together quite well. Brizek knew better than to ask if there were any updates on Gadaman's whereabouts. There weren't, and even though Brizek followed up on every report about discovered corpses, none matched Gadaman's description. The weasel was gone. Just don't mention that to Nico Mal. And with so much going on in the South, Mal continued brightly, and our immense success in raiding the mines, I've nearly forgotten to ask. What's the latest update on our colonel? Still terrifying everyone in Edge, Nico, smiled Brizek. She even asked for another bottle. Perrin's still on his knees in the pit and clawing uselessly at the walls, according to Thorne. Mal smiled in smug satisfaction. And she still hasn't asked for any more advice? No, Brizek said, his previous pleasure turning to consternation. Maybe she's found her own ways to deal with him. Mal scoffed. Not likely. Thorne's reports are filled with his erratic behavior. Just how long can he keep this up, Doctor? Brizek shrugged. It's truly remarkable. While he's at the bottom of that pit, he's still alive after 8 moons. I have to admit, Mal said, clasping his hands, I really thought he would have broken by now. I suppose our quiet man Zenas is keeping the fort together. So, he said with a tone of expectancy, what if Shin pulls through this? Is your latest plan satisfactory? Satisfactory? The doctor hooted. That would be the understatement of my life. The results are nothing short of spectacular. Now, if he'll just give me a reason to employ it, I'll be a contented man and my scientific career unparalleled. Mal sat back. My, are we still irked about the caravan to Edge? Brizek shook his head. I'm not petty, Nico. You can drop that condescending tone. I'm just fascinated. No matter what's thrown at him, he keeps coming back up. It's like trying to drown a frog. I know what will destroy him, Mal said. Just give me one of those children, the boy. The captain has already claimed the girl, so we can't touch her, at least not yet. But the boy doesn't even want to join the army, from what I've heard. Brizek shook his head. Trust me, Nico, this new project will be far more devastating to the colonel than merely losing half of his children. Just think, what would happen to him if he lost half his village? In a season or two, you'll be amazed at the results. If he makes it out of his trauma, he just might think he's invincible. And we certainly couldn't have him thinking like that. No, we could not, Nico Mal agreed. With thinking like that, he might begin to think he's our equal. And that's the end of the chapter. Thank you.